There is a very specific moment that happens when you use certain pieces of technology. It doesn't happen when you first unbox it. It doesn't even happen during the first few times you turn it on. It usually happens about 2 weeks in, right when the initial novelty starts to wear off. You stop thinking about what the device is on a technical level, and you start paying attention to how it actually makes you feel. This is exactly what happened with the DJI Neo 2 after 30 days of constant use. At the start, I looked at it exactly how the spec sheet wants you to look at it. I saw a small, casual drone. I saw something that looked a bit like a toy, clearly limited by its physical size, and definitely not something meant to replace a professional heavylifter. That framing made perfect sense to me until I noticed a strange habit forming. I found myself flying the Neo 2 even when I didn't actually need to. I wasn't out there testing a specific feature. I wasn't chasing a difficult cinematic shot for a project. I was flying it simply because it felt comfortable. That is a strange word to use for a drone, but it is more important than most pilots want to admit. When you fly most drones, even the small ones, there is always a background task running in your mind. You are constantly managing the aircraft. You are thinking about the wind gusts. You are making tiny battery corrections. You are worrying about stability. You are waiting for the drone to remind you that it is smaller and more fragile than it looks. Even if you are a very experienced pilot, you are doing this work subconsciously. Your brain is babysitting the machine. But with the Neo 2, that background noise fades away much faster than you would expect. When you launch it, the drone settles into the air and just stays composed. There is no nervous twitching. There are no micro-corrections that make you feel like the drone is struggling. When that babysitting stops, your attention shifts. You stop managing the machine and you start thinking about where you want to go next. This shift is subtle, but it is the core reason why the Neo 2 feels so different over time. This isn't a discussion about whether the Neo 2 is the most powerful drone on the market. It isn't about speed, and it definitely isn't about trying to squeeze impressive numbers out of a spec sheet. Instead, we need to look at why this drone is so easy to live with. We have to look at why that ease comes with a very specific trade-off that only reveals itself after weeks of use. The longer you fly this drone, the more you realize it has a personality. It wasn't designed to impress you with a wow factor on day one. It was designed to reduce friction. Every single part of the experience is tuned to remove the small stresses that usually pile up during a flight. From the way it launches to the way it holds its position, everything is meant to stop you from overthinking. When those stresses disappear, you start to fly more casually. You fly more often. You fly because the barrier to entry has been lowered to almost nothing. This is the environment where the Neo 2 thrives. However, this same design philosophy also explains its biggest limitation. It is a limitation that people often misunderstand because they are only looking at the numbers. To understand this properly, we have to talk about how the drone behaves in the air as a physical object. The Neo 2 doesn't just fly, it responds to you. The first thing you notice after spending real time with it is the total lack of drama in its movement. If you give it a small stick input, you get a small, predictable response. If you give it a large input, it scales up smoothly. Many compact drones feel eager, in a bad way. They surge forward and then pull back. They correct themselves too hard and then have to soften the movement. It works, but it constantly reminds you that the drone is working overtime to stay stable. The Neo 2 doesn't advertise that effort. Even when the wind picks up, it adjusts quietly. The frame stays composed. The movement stays readable. You never get the feeling that the drone is just one gust of wind away from losing its confidence. This calm behavior completely changes how you fly. You become less cautious with your minor movements because you trust the drone to settle itself. You don't spend forever hovering in one spot, waiting for the perfect moment to move. You just move. That trust builds surprisingly fast. While many drones are technically stable, stability alone doesn't create trust. Trust comes from consistency. The Neo 2 behaves exactly the same way every time you take it out. It doesn't matter if the conditions are perfect or slightly imperfect. Because it is predictable, your anxiety disappears. You aren't bracing for sudden changes or thinking, "Don't mess this up." You are just flying. This is the point where a drone stops being a piece of equipment and starts being a tool. This is also when you start having longer mental flight sessions, even if the physical flight time is short. People love to jump straight to talking about battery life when they mention the Neo 2. We will talk about that honestly, but if you start there, you miss the entire point of the experience. Flight time only feels short when flying feels like work. If every minute you spend in the air is stressful, you find yourself begging for more minutes. But if every minute feels smooth and productive, you don't feel rushed. The Neo 2 falls firmly into the second category. Its biggest limitation doesn't feel like a flaw at first. It feels like a boundary that you only notice once you have already enjoyed the experience. Once you get past that initial feeling of calm, you have to ask what happens when things stop being gentle. It is easy for any drone to look good when it is just hovering or doing a slow pan in light wind. The real test happens when the movement becomes unpredictable. This is where the Neo 2 separates itself from the competition. When you add speed or make sharp turns, the drone doesn't suddenly change its personality. It doesn't become jumpy or start fighting itself. It stays relaxed. Most small drones rely on very aggressive digital corrections to keep the footage usable. You can actually see the stabilization working because the image snaps back into place. It looks artificial, like the drone is fixing a mistake after it already happened. The Neo 2 takes a different approach. It feels like it anticipates the motion. Instead of reacting hard, it smooths the motion as it occurs. When you accelerate, the camera doesn't lag. When you slow down, it doesn't overshoot. The motion is continuous. This continuity makes the footage feel natural. You don't get that glued together digital look. The horizon stays controlled, but the movement still feels alive. This is very noticeable during side-to-side movements. The drone doesn't flatten the motion, it preserves the rhythm. Speaking of rhythm, we have to look at the tracking features. Usually, expectations for tracking on small drones are very low. On paper, these modes sound great, but in reality, they often look stressed. The drone usually struggles to keep up with a subject it doesn't fully understand. The Neo 2 doesn't track like that. When you lock onto someone, it doesn't rush to fix the framing immediately. It settles first, and then it follows. That half second of patience changes everything. It means the drone isn't constantly overcorrecting or hunting for the right position. It chooses a comfortable distance and maintains it. If the subject speeds up, the drone accelerates smoothly. If the subject slows down, it eases back. The result is tracking that looks intentional rather than reactive. It looks like a human is filming it. Even the obstacle avoidance follows this polite philosophy. Many drones avoid obstacles by slamming on the brakes or jerking sideways, which usually ruins your shot. The Neo 2 is much more graceful. When something enters its path, it doesn't panic. It adjusts its course gradually. It might shift a little higher or a little wider, but it always tries to preserve the flow of the movement. You notice this most when you are flying through trees or along narrow paths. The drone doesn't feel like it is fighting the environment. It feels like it is navigating through it. This is why the footage stays watchable even when the conditions are not perfect. The camera stays steady, and the shot stays intact. All of this builds a level of trust that is rare in this category. Because the flight is so smooth, you don't feel the passage of time the same way. You aren't mentally exhausted when you land. You aren't just relieved that you didn't crash. Instead, you feel satisfied. That satisfaction is what makes the battery behavior feel so different than what you see in the comment sections online. You aren't landing because something went wrong. You are landing because the session feels complete. This is an important distinction that leads us directly into the reality of the battery life.